I was out in the audience at this Eagle Summit, and I was out in D.C. interning for one of my senators from Indiana, from Senator Lear. And this was my first time, probably like many of you, being out in D.C. and being really involved in politics and spending time on the Hill. And if you're like me, you love it. You eat it up, you know. You just love the politics and love just being in the action. And one of the things I like the most about being out here is that it wasn't just Republicans and Democrats, you know, throwing out one-liners, you know, just the phrases that we hear the pundits saying on TV. People were really delving into the issues and really caring about things and getting into the nuances and arguing about things. And I especially love the opportunity to be surrounded by so many conservative women out here in D.C. And so when I went back to my campus in the fall of 2004 to start my junior year, I really sought out an environment like what I had found in D.C. I really sought out an environment where I could talk about issues with other conservative women. So I looked around on my campus to see what kind of women's organizations there were. If your campus was like mine, you had all types of organizations. You've got powerlifting clubs and belly dancing clubs and rugby clubs and underwater basket weaving clubs. You know, you name something and there's a club for it. Well, there were the women's organizations, but they didn't really accept, you know, more conservative women like myself. So then I searched databases around the country to look for, you know, organizations for conservative young women where I could affiliate with. And again, found nothing. So finally I had one more idea. You know, I'd heard there was a women's center at UVA, and I hadn't been there yet, but I figured, you know, it was a pretty innocuous sounding name, a women's center, would probably be open to all women. Boy, was I naive. I ended up going to the women's center and scheduling an appointment and taking a nice little tour through it. The woman who gave me the tour has now been promoted to be the Director of Diversity at the Women's Center, which you will find out is a bit humorous. But she gave me a tour, and we talked about the programs they offered, and at the end I decided I'd ask her the question I had been meaning to ask her the whole time. You know, would you be interested in co-sponsoring an organization for conservative young women? She just looked at me like I was crazy, laughed, and said, not here. And that is when I decided to start an organization for conservative young women on college campuses. Now, if any of your experiences is like mine, you've been to many organizations and club meetings where you go and you don't know what you're going to find. And I didn't want my club to be like that. So we started it as a book club. And so each month we meet twice, bi-weekly, and we discuss a chapter of the book that we're reading for the semester. And that's the first and foremost, the point of my organization. It's called the Network of Enlightened Women, NEW, as opposed to NOW, the National Organization of Women. And so we started at UVA and started as a book club. And then, as you've probably seen, you know, you get a bunch of women together, and you never know what's going to happen. And so our groups ended up expanding beyond the book club, and many of the chapters have now engaged in more activism and getting more involved on their college campuses. And to tell you a little bit about it, I started the organization in 2004 at UVA, and now 4 years later, we're a national organization. We're a 501c3 nonprofit with chapters on over a dozen campuses nationwide. We actually have a few women in the audience here who either have started chapters or are thinking about starting chapters in the fall. And I work with the chapters to model themselves after the UVA organization. So I provide them a disc with all the documents that we use. We have a book list on our website, and really try to make it easy. I send out chapter newsletters to make it easy for them to get involved. So that has been what I have been up to on the college campuses. And one thing I always wonder is, you know, why there hasn't been something like this and why it has been so successful. And I think it really comes down to the fact that, you know, while women have made major gains in the 20th century, you know, the feminists have just taken it too far to one extreme. Rather than giving women a real choice, they've made the choice for us. You know, that we should measure our self-worth and our value by our careers rather than by motherhood. And so I think that's the message that we are getting on our college campuses at UVA and on campuses around the country. You know, so that's why I started the Network of Enlightened Women. You know, we are a group for culturally conservative young women. We embrace our femininity. We embrace modesty. We actually recognize that there are differences between the sexes, unlike our radical feminist counterparts. And we really value the fact, we really value what women do beyond just careers. We recognize the value of motherhood and families and how important those are to society. And, you know, in case you were wondering, you know, we are all on college campuses and we see the fights going on. And most recently, there was a big National Women's Studies Association conference. I wrote a column on it from Town Hall. And you think of professors in academia, they're supposed to be teaching you things. Your history professors teach you about a subject. Your chemistry professors teach you what happens when you mix chemicals together. Well, on the Women's Studies website, their mission says that their goal is to teach social transformation. Quote that. And so it's fascinating to me that people were so surprised when a lot of these academics were getting involved in the election and claiming sexism and the glass ceiling. This is what these women's studies professors are trained to do. At their conference, they had panels on things like feminist activism from the inside out, connecting campus to community. And another panel, you say you want a revolution. They even had a panel where they discussed, and I quote, conservative attacks on women's rights. And this shows what we're up against. These women's studies professors are paid by the states in many situations, and they're institutionalized. It's institutionalized radical feminism on our campus. And I think that's why NEW is so important, is because we're giving other women a voice. And most recently, we had our national conference 2 weeks ago, and one of the things we decided to do was much like when I decided to start the club, is we decided to launch a blog. It's www.enlightenedwomen.org /blog, and you can get it from our website. And there, once again, there's a lot of feminist websites out there commenting on the issues of the day, and there wasn't a website just for conservative young women. And so myself and 3 of our chapter presidents of the organization write for it and discuss ideas and events and pop culture from a more culturally conservative perspective. And so we're hoping to provide a voice for women in that as well. And on closing, I just want to say, feminists have been really outspoken. And there's one, they get up there and they speak, and they claim they speak for all women, but they don't. And one of my favorite quotes is by Alexander Hamilton. He said, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for everything. And so I really encourage you to stand up for your principles and think about how you can make a difference on your college campus. Like I said at the beginning, 4 years ago, I was an intern out in D.C., and now I'm a third-year law student at the University of Virginia and run Network of Enlightened Women on the side. Like I said, we're on 15 college campuses and continue to grow. So you can really make a difference. And if any of you are interested in starting a chapter or getting involved, I encourage you to check out our website. It's on that flyer, enlightenedwomen.org, or I'd be happy to talk to anybody afterwards. And really encourage you to stand up and make a difference and be a leader on your campus. Because if you don't, there's a real question of who will. So thank you.
Great job. Invite you all to start a club on your own campus. Now, do you have any questions for